Very good morning to all. So may I invite the panelists for the first session, Uncovering Violations, Human Rights Review of Regions under China. Mr. Fang Xianghui, please come forward on the stage. And Mr. Johnny Fogg, Mr. Lee Chung-Lun, Dr. Tenzin Dasel, and Ms. Zumrite Arkin. So let us first congratulate His Holiness the Dalai Lama for winning the Grammy Awards, which of course is in recognition of his message of peace, compassion, and the oneness of humanity. And as Honorable Sikyong mentioned this morning, beginning last July 6, His Holiness turned 90, and we are celebrating his 90th birth year throughout the year into July 6, 2026. And His Holiness, so we wish His Holiness a long life, as we Tibetans pray that he lives for aeons. At least His Holiness lives up to 135 years, as he has promised on many occasions. So let us all wish His Holiness a very happy birthday and birth year. So I would like to begin today's panel discussion, and I would like to invite Mr. Fang Xianghui, a Chinese human rights lawyer, and Mr. Xianghui is a Chinese human rights lawyer and has presented several freedom of religion and belief and politically sensitive cases. He was defense lawyer of New Civil Movement and White Paper Movement. He is also the overseas contact of Chinese Human Rights Lawyer Group, 709 crackdown victim. He's the sixth batch of signees of Charter 08 and also a member of Union of Chinese Nationalities. So looking at the time available to us, so the panelists will have 15 to 20 minutes to make your presentation and speak to the floor. So, Mr. Fang Xianghui.
Thank you, Karma, for introducing me. I really appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank Central Tibetan Administration and the Office of Tibetan in Geneva and all the organizers for this event. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I was a Chinese human rights lawyer from 2014 to 2025, when my lawyer's license was cancelled by Chinese authority. As Karma mentioned, I am the overseas contact of the Chinese Human Rights Lawyer Group. I show you, the Chinese Human Rights Lawyers Group is an unregistered and loose organization founded in September 2013. It serves as a collaborative platform for Chinese lawyers who are committed to caring about and defending human rights cases in China. When I got the topic the broad overview of the human rights situation in China, highlighting the group violations faced in mainland China, I was thinking about what I should speak. And I remembered we had just completed the top 10 human rights cases of 2025 selection event in January. These top 10 cases reflect the latest trends in human rights violation by the Chinese authorities, which perfectly match the given topic. So I'd like to present you my obligation. Sorry for a moment. It's French. Okay. Yeah, I'd like to present you my observation, but I want to say that different organizations could select different top 10 cases and provide different comments on them. The top 10 selected cases of Chinese human rights lawyer group are currently displayed on the screen. We are able to briefly review them. Each cases and events will be mentioned later as well, with links provided to the origin reports. But I'm sorry, I cannot open the linked original report. The top 10 selected cases of Chinese human rights lawyer group this top 10 selected cases covered 5 main areas. The number one, crackdown on free speech and protest. Second one, harm to children's rights and bodies. Third, transnational repression, fear fellows people overseas. Fourth, secret arrests and disappearances. 5, attacks on freedom of religion or belief. I will place particular emphasis on verb, since this right serves as a key indicator of a country's constitutional protection for a wide range of fundamental human rights. Let's review the first one. Crackdown on speech and protest. 梅士林 the Chengdu banner hunger stormed the tower activists and Jiangyu mass protest in Sichuan. These cases demonstrate that the boundary of free speech are shrinking. The peaceful expression of individuals, such as Mei Shilin, is criminalized as piquing quarrel and provoking trouble, while collective incidents turn into battlefield for stable maintenance, resulting in a lack of procedural justice and the accumulation of social conflict. The second one, harm to children's rights and bodies. Forced mass bloody drawing of primary and secondary school students event, and Gansu, 233 kindergarten children were pointed with lead. Both cases concern the bioinformation security and health rights of minors, addressing previously overlooked area of rights within schools. Forced blood draws are suspected of violating the constitutional rights to physical freedom, while the lead poisoning incidents reflect a lack of regulatory oversight and the concealment of pollution. This event called for enhanced administrative transparency and parental involvement to prevent the abuse of power from harming vulnerable groups. The third one, transnational repression. The case of Zhang Yadi, also known as Tara, I think many Tibetans could know her, yeah. Zhang Yadi of Chinese Youth Stand for Tibet, and the returning overseas student Hu Yang, and transnational repression against overseas Chinese human rights lawyers. These cases show that transnational repression has become the norm and mean to intimidate the overseas diaspora and international students while violating their freedom of expression and personal safety. The international community must strengthen protection mechanisms and call out this type of long-arm jurisdiction. The fourth, secret arrest and disappearances. Whether it is the case of Du Bin, where families were never notified and lawyers were kept in dark, or Yin Xuan, who has been subjected to informed disappearance. These instances highlight a judicial black box and arbitrary use of power. Citizens are using disappearance simply for voicing dissent or traveling, a situation that demands stronger oversight and international intervention. The fifth, attacks on freedom of religion or belief. 4. The Zion Church case, where Pastor Jin Mingri, also known as Ezra Jin, and 17 other pastors and church staff were charged with illegal use of information networks, highlights one aspect of China's so-called law-based governance. Under the guise of law, authorities persecute religion groups, deliberately avoiding political or religious separation charges like those related to endangering state security. The CCP is growing increasing confidence in its autocratic power. Despite the extremely high level of international attention this case has received, the authorities show zero concern. In fact, they are ramping up similar crackdowns on churches of comparable scale to dilute global focus on these specific incidents. Subsequently, we saw the cases of Yayang Church in Wenzhou and Oriental Covenant Church in Chengdu, as well as the earlier case involving Pastor Huang Yizhi. Each of these incidents stands out as one of the most significant cases of religious repression in China over the past few decades. Everybody can see the picture. Yeah, this picture is photographed in January 2022. This is Elder Li Yingqiang of Oriental Covenant Church and me. Yeah, this is what photographed. In 2025, religion repression is absolutely the most gross violation of fundamental human rights. These religion cases are not random rogue actions. They show a national plan, use vulgar criminal laws, heavy police force, surveillance cameras, and forced removal of crosses to destroy any Christian group that stays independent. The fundamental logic of religion repression is the CCP's policy of sinicization of religion. Its core requirement is that all religion groups must conform to the will of CCP. Independent religious groups are not allowed to exist. Why is religious repression so deserved to be highly concerned? For it's a key indicator of a country's constitutional protection for a wide range of fundamental human rights. When faith itself becomes a crime, the practicing behavior, such as speech, gathering, sharing ideas, and forming communities, all become crimes too. Why? Because freedom of religion or belief touches almost everything else. It includes the right to speak your belief out loud. It is freedom of speech. The right to gather with others who share your faith. It is the freedom of assembly. The right to print books, songs, or messages about your faith. This is freedom of press. The right to form groups or communities around your beliefs. This is the freedom of association. I strongly urge the international communities to take action against the persecution of freedom of religion or belief. So in closing, the top 10 cases of 2025 tell one big story. The Chinese government is severely tightened control in every direction: faith, word, protests, children, overseas students, even dissidents seeking doctors. But even in this darkness, ordinary people keep resisting. Elders record goodbye video for the children before arrest. Human rights lawyers keep filing requests even when the doors are slammed. Protesters still shout for justice. That courage gave us hope. To everyone here, please don't look away. Speak up, support Chinese human rights lawyers and monitors. Ensure Chinese human rights issues are raised in every meeting concerning China. Help keep the light on these injustices. Human rights are not luxury items. They are the fundamental dignity every person deserves, starting with the right to believe, to speak, and to live without fear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fang Xionghui, for your presentation on the human rights violations taking place inside the mainland China, with particular focus on the violations against the Christian community. Thank you very much. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Johnny Falk to speak. Mr. Johnny Falk is a barrister at law in Hong Kong and an advocate for democracy in Hong Kong. He served as a voluntary lawyer in 2014 Umbrella Movement in Hong Kong, as well as a voluntary lawyer in 2019 protests in Hong Kong. He personally joined the protests in 2019 in Hong Kong. He is also one of the 19 wanted persons of Hong Kong government under the notorious national security law in Hong Kong. Because of his overseas activities in relation to democracy, namely being founding member of Hong Kong Parliament and being a member of Hong Kong Parliament Election Organizing Committee, of which the election of the first Hong Kong Parliament was duly held in the year 2025. Mr. Falk.
Thank you for introducing me. Distinguished guests, fellows, human rights defenders, friends from Tibet, and friends from the other countries. I'm very happy to see you. Today I stand here as a lawyer in Hong Kong and as a Hong Konger in Hong Kong. I'm personally a barrister at law in Hong Kong, and I'm supposed to be defending justice in court in Hong Kong. Unfortunately, you may not believe so. I am one of the wanted person of the Hong Kong government because of what I did in Hong Kong in 2019. I'm going to share with you the situation now in Hong Kong with you today. I also take this chance to say thank you to the Tibetan government in exile, the Central Tibetan administration for inviting me to be here today for the event. Although we come from different geographical locations, we are facing the same oppressions, the suffering experienced by Tibet is being experienced by those in Hong Kong in another form. As a lawyer, I once believed that the law was a shield protecting the citizens. But after the forced implementations of national security law in year 2020, the shield was turned into a weapon against dissidents. In present day in Hong Kong, the law is no longer used to define rights, but to oppress opinion. You can see the Apple Daily case, the Lex Media case, the Jimmy Lai case. Mr. Jimmy Lai's case is a textbook example of how the Chinese government destroyed the speech and political persecution. The so-called evidence presented by the prosecution consists merely articles written by Mr. Lai, and also interviews with foreign media, and even his posts on the social media. The deprivations of legal representation. The Hong Kong government even went further to amend the law to forcibly prevent Mr. Lai from bringing a foreign lawyer of his choice to defend him. When media owners were convicted for their words, and when the livelihoods of thousands of journalists are forcibly ended overnight by freezing their assets, Hong Kong people have lost their right to the truth. I will come to the more details of his case later. Also another case, 47 persons case. This is a primary election case in Hong Kong. Those legislators and activists representing public opinion were detained for over 3 years without conviction and a trial. This is unbelievable in any society governed by the rule of law. The case has now been concluded, and those have been sentenced for a very long imprisonment in Hong Kong because simply they won the election, they won the primary. In any normal society governed by the rule of law, organizing a primary elections and attempting to pressure the government by winning a parliamentary majority is a very normal function of a democratic system. But in Hong Kong, this is now defined as a crime. This is now defined as a subversion of the state power. This case is obviously a destruction of Hong Kong's entire civil society and the voting rights. Many defendants have been detained for over 3 years, even without convictions. In Hong Kong, supposed to be a common law city, the national security case can be decided behind the closed door by the judges selected by the government, by the pro-Beijing government, without any juries. This is not the rule of law. This is a political persecution carried out in the name of law. Overseas bounties and threatening those overseas Hong Kongers. I personally, as a warned lawyer, I deeply understand this. The Hong Kong government has issued a Hong Kong 1 million bounty on each of the overseas activists, including myself. This is not just about arresting us. This is a global psychological deterrent. Family implications. The National Security Department even has repeatedly taken the families of the Hong Kong residents in exile for intimidations and interrogations. They are attempting to extend their authoritarian regime to even to overseas countries like UK, like in the US. This is a serious challenge to the sovereignty and human rights order of global democracies. If the world remains silent, this kind of overseas repressions will become the new normal. I would then like to highlight with you some of the national security law cases so that you understand better the persecutions in Hong Kong right now. The very first case of national security law. The very first case was a person who is a youngster named Tong Ying Kit. He was arrested for driving a motorcycle, passing through the police line during the 1st July in 2020, the March. His motorcycle was hanging a flag, which is stating that liberate Hong Kong, revolution of our time. Tong Ying Kit was charged with 3 counts: reckless driving, inciting secession and terrorism, even merely by driving his motorcycle. So he has been found guilty and sentenced to 9 years imprisonment in Hong Kong. Another national security case law. Chung Hon Nam, a Hong Kong student of an organization, and 3 former members of student localism were arrested in year 2020. Chung was charged with secession, money laundering, and conspiracy to publish seditious publications. He was sentenced to 3 years and 7 months in prison. After serving his sentence, he fled to the UK to apply for political asylum. And during his supervised period, he has been alleged to have violated the Correctional Service Department supervision order. The Deputy Commissioner of Correctional Service in Hong Kong issued a recall order and contacted other law enforcement agents over the world to issue an arrest warrant against him. He's just a student in Hong Kong. He's now also a wanted person by the Hong Kong government. Another case which involved a political party you may have heard of, Demosesto. One of the members named Agnes Chow in Hong Kong, being a vice chairman of the political parties in Hong Kong. On 10th of August, year 2020, police arrest Agnes Chow on charge of colluding with foreign force, accusing her of using social media to call for foreign sanctions against Hong Kong. She was granted bail the following evening, and her Hong Kong SAR passport was even confiscated. She has not been prosecuted since then. Later, she successfully applied to police to study in Canada and left Hong Kong in middle of September, year 2023. On 1st of December 2023, she posted on the social media announcing her in exile and that she would not be able to return to Hong Kong. She also stated that she was required to travel to Shenzhen when she was in Hong Kong under the supervision of the National Security Department personnel as a condition for the return of her passport. During that period, she was required to visit the Reform and Opening Up exhibition and even visit a China Enterprise Tencent headquarters in Shenzhen. Upon returning to Hong Kong, she was also required to write a handwritten letter expressing her gratitude to the police for arranging the trip so that she could understand better the motherland, namely China. The Apple Daily case. The Apple Daily case, unfortunately, Mr. Jimmy Lai has been sentenced today. It is a very, very heavy sentence, which is 20 years, for merely holding a conference, chatting with the other politicians in Europe for talking about the possibility of censoring Hong Kong officials for what they have done in year 2019. Jimmy Lai case, Jimmy was convicted this year, and his sentence has now been passed today. This case is divided into 4 parts. I will just go into it in gist. The case also involved a rental fraud case about the Lex Media building, which was also the initial reasons for the police arrest of Jimmy Lai and the search of Lex Media building. The defendants in the case are Jimmy Lai, Wong Wai Kun, and Chow Tek Keung, 3 senior Apple Daily executives. They are all being charged under the national security law. The fourth case involved other persons, namely Lau Cho Tek and Li Yu Hin. Both are youngsters in Hong Kong. They have been alleged to have collided with the foreign force to make sanctions against Hong Kong officials. They are being charged for the case. And Lau Cho Tek is currently in exile overseas. I think he's in UK right now. And Li Yu Hin and Chen Chi-Wah plead guilty on the charge. and they have been charged and been sentenced, and pending, their sentence has been pending Gemini's case, and Gemini's case has been now, sentence has been passed today. Another case, Tibettv case, a vice president and a vice chairperson of People Power, a political party in Hong Kong. This person, I know him personally, and he's a friend of mine. He has been arrested multiple times for setting up street stall and chanting slogan. After being arrested by national security official on 6th of September, he was charged with multiple counts of publishing seditious texts, also following a lengthy legal proceeding. On 3rd of March, year 2022, the magistrate found that Tibettv is guilty on 7 counts of publishing seditious texts and 1 count of inciting others to participate in an unauthorized assembly, and 1 count of disorderly conduct in public place, 1 count of holding an unauthorized public assembly, and 1 count of refusing to comply with, willfully neglecting to comply with orders given by the authorized persons. He was acquitted on 2 counts, disorderly conduct in a public place, and 1 count of conspiracy to publish seditious texts. His total sentence was 3 years, and he has now been in the prisons because of his involvement in the 47 primary election case. Another case, which is a little bit similar to my situations, this person's name Wong Yu Sing, who is a host on the online video stations, namely D100. In February 2020, he launched an online crowdfunding campaign, which is called 1,000 Parents for our Taiwan Education Assistance, to provide tuitions and living expenses for Hong Kong protesters in exile in Taiwan. He was arrested twice by national security in year 2020. He ultimately pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit sedition and 3 counts of money laundering. As you can see, a person making a crowdfunding can be charged in Hong Kong for money laundering. This is terrible. Money laundering is a crime for tribe members, but now this has been a weapon against Hong Kong citizens. The last but not least, the Hong Kong Parliament case, which I am personally involved. This case is about Hong Kongers trying to form their own parliament in Hong Kong. This election is held overseas by an online platform. If you got a Hong Kong ID card and if you got a Hong Kong passport, you may use the online platform to try to vote. So this is an idea for Hong Kongers to try to elect the representative. However, the Hong Kong government will not allow you to do so. The National Security Department issued warrant for those involved in this case. This is also known as a 19 individuals Hong Kong Parliament case. I'm one of the wanted person in this case. There are still many other cases, and because of the constraint of time today, I think I can only share some of the cases with you today. In the summer of year 2019, I took to the street because I was fulfilling my duties and tried to defend the protester. I was accused of various political crimes, including those I just mentioned. In Hong Kong, many people now lost their basic right. I stand here to tell the world, if you don't pay attention to what happened in Hong Kong today, the authoritarian, the Chinese government, the so-called rule of law model will destroy the global free order. I would like to make the following suggestions today. Please refuse to acknowledge the current illusions of rule of law in Hong Kong. International legal organizations should examine whether the Hong Kong Law Society and also even the Bar Association, even if I am a member of a Bar Association, whether they are still independent. The world has to be very careful to look into it. And please say no to the Beijing-controlled judiciary in Hong Kong. Stop recognizing them. They are not a legal court anymore. And please continue to monitor the treatment of political prisoners, especially those deprived of their basic right under the national security law, like Jimmy Lai and Joshua Wong. And finally, we unite together for the struggle. Whether Tibetans, Uyghurs, and Hong Kongers, and those who are in the democratic world, we join together, we unite together, we stand up and say no to the CCP. That's all I want to share with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Johnny Falk, for sharing with us the current situation inside Hong Kong and with particular focus on the persecutions the civil society members are facing inside Hong Kong. Thank you very much for your presentation. May I invite Mr. Lee Chung-lun. Mr. Lee Chung-lun is China Program Officer at the International Service for Human Rights. He works on advancing international accountability for human rights violations in China and supporting human rights defenders from China, Hong Kong, Tibet, and Uyghur region in their engagement with United Nations human rights mechanisms. He has previously worked on election observation, democratic governance, and human rights advocacy across Asia. Mr. Lun, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's an honor to represent the International Service for Human Rights, ICHR, to speak on this panel. So we are an NGO based in Geneva and New York that works on promoting accountability and supporting human rights defenders for their engagement with the UN. So our title of the discussion today is Uncovering Violation. I think I can talk about this for days, if not hours, but I only have 15 minutes, so I'll try to be brief. I will provide an overview of the human rights situation in China and various regions documented by the UN system. So this includes an extensive body of documentation that include letters, reports, legal opinion by different UN special procedures, OHCHR, treaty bodies, etc. First of all, I would like to acknowledge my fellow panelists who will share very detailed information about the situation on the ground based on their lived experience of their communities across mainland China, the Uyghur region, Tibet, and Hong Kong. So I defer to their authority to speak about these lived realities, and I will just share how the UN system has validated and documented these violations. So I categorize these violations into four different patterns. The first one is the weaponization of anti-terrorism and the national security legal framework. So the UN documentation has highlighted that these laws are very broad, vague, and open-ended. Crimes such as inciting subversion or subversion to state powers are so broad, they just criminalize any peaceful and legitimate activities that include protests, freedom of expression, or religious activities. And I think the most concerning is the use of the residential surveillance at a designated location, or known as RSDL. So this is a system that allows state authorities to detain individuals incommunicado up to 6 months. So this is outside the regular detention practice. And it doesn't have any judicial oversight on this. UN experts have been saying that RSDL is not compatible with international human rights laws, and they have defined it as a form of enforced disappearance that puts individuals at a heightened risk of torture. Back in 2015, during the review of China by the Committee Against Torture at the UN, the committee has called for urgent repeal, but it's been over 11 years and the law is still there. And we expect this will be the center of the discussion in China's upcoming review by the committee. We also see this architecture of violations that reach Hong Kong, as Johnny has also mentioned earlier. So the UN experts have expressed grave concerns about the use of national security law since 2020, and it has abolished the independence of the judiciary in Hong Kong. And they have also repeatedly called for its repeal. And now it has still been used to silence journalists, human rights defenders, academics, etc. As Johnny also mentioned, like today, newspaper owner Jimmy Lai has just been sentenced to 20 years under the national security law. And just 15 minutes ago, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, just released a press statement that called for his release. The second pattern is on the crackdown on civil society. UN experts have documented a systemic pattern where human rights defenders and lawyers face persecution, reprisals, and forced disappearance in China for their legitimate work. And we see that many human rights defenders and lawyers being sentenced to lengthy jail sentence. Just to share a few cases, like Xu Zhiyong, Ding Jiaxi, and Ilham Tohti, they have been sentenced more than 10 years in prison. And there is also another subset of this crackdown where women human rights defenders face another unique form of intimidation and sexual violence for doing their work. There is also reprisals for engaging with the UN. Just to share an example, human rights defender Cao Shunli, she has been detained 12 years ago before she came here for engaging with the UN, and she died. So this crackdown effectively shut down the door for any independent civil society advocacy within China. And we have seen the rise of government-organized NGOs that occupy the space. And we can see they are quite active in the UN space as well. You can see they submitted a lot of submissions that praise China compared to independent civil society's submission. The third pattern I would like to share is the coordinated campaign of sinicization. So it's a campaign that aims at eroding linguistic, religious, and cultural identities of different ethnic and religious communities in China. UN experts have also talked about this a lot, particularly on the coerced residential or boarding schools. That impacts about 1 million Tibetan children. I think we also have other panelists will speak about this in detail. And this has also been increasingly used in the Uyghur region. So basically what China does is they try to erase this cultural heritage and make them Han Chinese. There is also documented cases of systemic and massive destruction of religious sites like shrines, monasteries, mosques, specifically in the UN, specifically in the Uyghur region and the Tibetan region. And finally, there's another well-documented pattern, that is the non-voluntary labor transfer that we usually see in the Uyghur region. So this, they call it poverty elevation through labor transfer program. This is also documented by the UN, which coerces Uyghurs and members of other ethnic groups into other jobs in the Uyghur region or other regions. And they often relegate women and other people into low-skilled jobs despite having their existing unique skills. And just last month, in January, UN experts, they come up with a press statement saying that this non-voluntary labor transfer may amount to crime against humanity. The fourth and the final pattern is surveillance and transnational repression. The OHCHR report on the Uyghur region in 2022 has detailed a very sophisticated surveillance system that China has employed. They use facial recognition, iris scan, and big data to survey on people. The report mentioned that the system uses a system that flags at-risk behavior of the people that can be as simple as communicating with people abroad or downloading religious material from online. And I think on TNR, or the transnational repression, I think this is very important for colleagues from other countries because China's repression doesn't stop at the border. And we have seen a lot of cases where people living overseas face a surge in transnational repression in various forms. This is documented by the UN experts as well. And authorities often use this pressure to pressure their family in China to stop these people living overseas to continue their advocacy. There is also a grave concern about forcibly return of people from the third country back to China, and cases that were documented include the deportation of Uyghur men from Thailand last year, and also the deportation of human rights lawyer Lu Siwei from Laos back to China. So this is actually like a part of the global pattern that China employs to silence dissents living overseas. So the UN documentation has actually, included a lot of details of this repression across different regions in China, and they have been done by various mandates at the UN. So I think the challenge here we face is not the lack of information or the lack of documentation, but the lack of action by China and also the other countries to press China to stop these violations. It is very important for governments to press China to implement this recommendation by the UN. So ISHR has come up with a repository of recommendation by the UN bodies. So if you Google ISHR UN repository by UN experts, you can see that there's a big list of recommendations by UN experts to China. I would like to highlight a few. One, it has been repeatedly said by UN experts, release all those who are arbitrarily detained. So in all dialogues with China, it would be great to mention the individual cases, individuals who are currently being detained by China, raise this with China, ask China to immediately release them. Secondly, repeal Article 105 of the criminal law, which is the one I mentioned earlier, inciting subversion, and also the RSDL and Hong Kong national security law. And thirdly, also something that has been frequently mentioned, abolish the forced boarding school system and coerced labor program in Tibet and the Uyghur region. On transnational repression, the OHCHR, they have come up with a brief on TNR last year. So it includes very useful recommendations from different governments, for different governments to address TNR in their countries. Among them include uphold the principle of non-refoulement, meaning that not sending those who are at risk back to China, strengthen domestic protection for human rights defenders and dissents who are living overseas, not to send them back to China, and also strengthen the protection for those facing harassment and digital surveillance. So I will stop here for now. I look forward to hearing more from other panels in this panel and other panelists for today. And yeah, if you have any questions, we are happy to address this at the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee Chung Liu, for sharing with us the patterns through which the Chinese government is violating human rights, committing violations of human rights inside China, and how the UN Human Rights Committees, the oversight committees, mandate holders, and other offices are documenting, monitoring, and reporting these cases of human rights violations. Thank you very much for your presentation. And the next speaker we have is Dr. Tenzin Dassel. Dr. Dassel is an anthropologist of Tibet and the Himalayas. He is currently the Senior Research Fellow of the Tibet Policy Institute. He edits the in-house annual English journal. He is also the editor of special issue of the TPI journal, titled Foregrounding Tibet. He has written on issues related to center-periphery relations between Tibet and China. He is also an elected member to the Board of Advisors of the International Seminar of Young Tibetologists. Dr. Dassel. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, for this generous introduction. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizing team for inviting us over and then having us over in Geneva. And when I received the invitation, I was requested to speak on uncovering rights violations in Tibet. And considering the theme of the conference is regarding the repression and resilience, I thought it might be useful to really think about the resilience aspect, because there are so many people inside this hall, many esteemed members in here, who have been relentlessly documenting many of the rights violations. So I think it would be a lot more useful to think about the resilience aspect and to engage in sort of a group thinking, considering we have practitioners, scholars, and I sort of occupy a quasi-academic space in Dharamshala, so thought it would be useful to engage in that way. So my presentation is regarding how do we really reclaim human rights discourse, particularly in this day and age. Of course, we are witnessing a churn these days, and this churn has been a long time in the making. So how do we really reclaim this human rights discourse? And how can we attach this human rights discourse to a restorative justice? So many years back, about 5-6 years back, I was looking at studying a particular period in Tibetan histories in late 1950s and early 1960s, which is referred to as democratic reform in Tibet. Deeply violent period in Tibet's history, where there was this enormous social engineering was occurring, and state violence were directed against the Tibetan people. So I was looking at policy documents, memoirs, newspapers, and how Tibetans were remembering those accounts, how the memories were transmitted to the Tibetan people of this generation. So I was looking at that, and I sort of wrote a report in a very obscure academic journal, and I'm sure nobody has, it's very obscure, so nobody gets to read them. But how do we really account for those sort of violence, those kind of knowledge, in a way that can be leveraged in dispensing justice towards the Tibetan people? So this is another discovery that was made in 2013. So this is attached to how can we historicize those particular moments of those histories. So these were the human bones that was recovered. So the construction was happening, and people uncovered remains of mass grave in those areas. So how can we address, so I'm just going to change the slide. Okay, so how can we address those violence that occurred after the occupation of Tibet? So how can we attach those? So I'm very glad that Geshe Tupten Wangchela is here. One way is to really look at the way through the criminal justice system. So you can take Hu Jintao to court and then take him to the High Court and to the Constitutional Court and then hold them accountable. So this is one way of doing it. So this is in a way to frame justice in a criminal justice system. So this question has been raised, and also a scholar like Mamdani would say this would perpetuate. So this is individualizing the crimes committed against a group of people to certain individuals. So a Nuremberg-style sort of restorative justice is one approach. But is there any other way of thinking? Can we really think about any other ways through which we can think of restorative justice, where we can attach it to a collective rights of the Tibetan people? So before we begin with, before we can dwell into attaching this restorative justice, the crime or the violence that was committed against the Tibetan people to the broader restorative justice, I think it's quite important to be able to understand the broad contours of China's policies in Tibet. And so this is basically the really looking at how discourse is shaped within People's Republic of China. So when we say, oh, China is doing extraordinary things in Tibet, so look at this development, look at this extraordinary things, look at this infrastructure development, we have to disentangle two facets of China's Tibet policy. One is the state-making policy, which is quite extraordinary. You can look at fantastic developments in terms of infrastructure development, urbanization, the so-called poverty elevation, and all these aspects. These are state-making aspects. And another failure that China China has been an abysmal failure is the nation-building project. Even to this day, China cannot claim the distinction between the Tibetan people and the Chinese people are the imagination, the glue that binds the Tibetan people to the Chinese state has failed, so there's no glue that attaches. So that imagination hasn't really yet come through. So under such circumstances, how China is using global human rights mechanism, how China is redefining human rights discourses, and I think it's quite important to understand how and what are the approaches that China employs in order to redefine its definition of human rights. So one way China has been employing this idea that human rights is a Western concept, that human rights so there's this idea of cultural relativism. So we are distinct people, we have different understanding of human rights. So this is a Western concept, so we don't have to really deal with this question. So this is one way of doing this one. And then the second one, which is more pernicious, is to really look at how the discourse is shaped by putting the primacy of development as a key feature of human rights discourses. So if you look at human rights, so the claim that human rights has to be defined within that framework of nation state. So non-interference, so this is a concept that has to be defined within a certain aspect and certain unit of analysis. So why do we really need to understand this aspect is this development first policy, development first definition, this discourse of human rights is deployed to erase memories, to erase discourses that actually looks after the rights of the Tibetan people. So if you look at, so if you say that, okay, this Tibetan rights are being violated, then the immediate response seemed to be that, oh, look at the development that we have come up with, look at these extraordinary urbanization, look at these highways that we have built, look at the railways. So this is sort of a preemptive argument to blunt criticism of China's violation of rights in Tibet and many other regions, I suppose. And the second form is to look at the discourse in terms of China use development as a tool of domination. How do they do that? That Tibet is an impoverished region, and we have to sort of come in so that we can develop this region. Now, this paternalistic attitude that, this group of people, they have to be developed and liberated so that they can be on par with the rest of the Chinese state or Chinese people, or to be part of the global community. So now if you look at this discourse, what it does is that this discourse basically deprives the Tibetan people of its agency in saying that the Tibetan peoples are incapable of development themselves. If you look at 1950s, if you look at any of the indices of human rights, of human development index, particularly if you look at 1940s, the trajectory, if left to the Tibetan people themselves, can we think about a development that is defined by the Tibetan people, and Tibetan people are the vector of that development. I think that counterfactual argument that has to be advanced time and again. I think this paternalistic attitude that the Chinese state has to sort of come in and develop the Tibetan people. So this sort of development argument that Tibetans have to be elevated from poverty, Tibetans have to be connected with highways, this attitude is used as a tool of domination. So this human rights discourse is another way of doing it. Another pernicious mechanism is to look at how Chinese state is using the human rights mechanism, particularly now that we are discussing about this in Geneva. I imagine many of the people who are based here would be more aware of the fact that the Chinese state is employing a lot more resources in blunting human rights mechanism and human rights accountability of the Chinese states towards its people and many other so-called minority people in PRC. Now, how do they do this? Is through, particularly since Xi Jinping came to power, is through these three initiatives that was undertaken by Xi Jinping. So these three initiatives is Global Development Initiative, Global Security Initiative, Global Civilizational Initiative. So there's no time to unpack these three initiatives. Suffice to say that these three key initiatives sort of redefines the order that we that was instrumental in internationalizing the Tibetan movement, and the cause of the Tibetan people being a very important aspect of popular imagination. Now, so same, you can find the same argument being advanced in many of the white papers. So if you look at 2021, Liberation, Development Reform in Tibet, 60 years on, and Tibet's path to development. So development as a discourse is used as a blunt tool to snub out any form of arguments, any form of criticism of its rights violation in Tibet. So this is something that we have to be extremely careful. Now, how do we really reclaim that discourse? Is there any way that we can exert agency to reclaim the resource? And I think one of the ways there are many ways through which we can reclaim that discourse. One is through exertion of Tibetan agency. So one of the fundamental is human rights is a very radical idea in a sense that it affords any individual on this planet with the right to exert its own agency. And I think this is a very radical idea, and this radical idea has to be used by people such as the Tibetan people in exerting human agency. And then another way, so another argument is to say that, okay, this is human rights is basically an argument about individual rights. So you have particular cases, okay, this is a violation of human rights. But what we have to do, particularly in terms of minoritized region in People's Republic of China, and including the Tibetan people, is to really look at how it is structured. Human rights violation in Tibet and many minoritized regions in Tibet is a structural issue. And I think this is something that we have to really look into. It's not about this particular case 1, case 2, case 3, case 4. It's not about individualizing the rights violation, but it's more structured violence that is actually systematically violating the rights of the Tibetan and many minoritized regions. I'm coming towards the end of my presentation, and I don't think one of the crucial aspect that we have to really think, particularly in terms of human rights, is that over the years, the human rights discourse has lost its soul, so to speak of. It has lost its moral courage. And I think the case of the Tibetan people and many minoritized regions, I think there's a case to be made about instilling morality in human rights discourse. And I think this is something that we have to look into. How do we do this? This Tibetan case for the rights of the Tibetan people, we have to account for erasure and violence. So, like I was mentioning you about this particular story that was of state violence that was particularly committed during this period of so-called democratic reforms from mid-1950s to 1962. How can we account for those violence? Of course, Kung Sikyongla mentioned about the rise of the Tibetan people to statehood through historical documents. So what happens to the Tibetan people once when the Tibetan people were occupied by the Chinese state? How can we think about restorative justice of the Tibetan people after the occupation of Tibet? So for this, in order to account for those violence, I think we have to think in terms of restorative justice and to really think in terms of to challenge the epistemic asymmetry. What do I mean by epistemic asymmetry? So in Dharamshala, there was this call by His Holiness the Dalai Lama to request many Tibetans who have suffered under the Chinese regime to record their own histories and memories. So many lettered and unlettered Tibetans sort of committed themselves to writing those histories and memories, and there are numerous publications based on that. how can we leverage those memories? How can we leverage those stories? How can we leverage those narratives in a restorative justice? And I think those are the questions we have to really think about. And we have to think about truth, presenting the truth of violence and the suffering of the Tibetan people through committing to a truth commission, through recording, to account for this epistemic asymmetry by creating a commission that can present those memories of lettered and unlettered Tibetan people. And I imagine you can do the same thing with many other regions who are undergoing many similar circumstances in People's Republic of China, to really think about how can we account for this epistemic asymmetry and to let them know that the violence can be, those violence has to be accounted for. And the restorative justice is a way through which we can account for the violence that has occurred, perpetrated by the state. So I'm just going to end this presentation by making two key points. One is to instill morality into the human rights discourse, and I think the movement that is spearheaded by the Tibetan people, I think it's a moral cause, and I think we can instill back those causes. And often I think there's this tendency to really configure Tibet in geopolitical terms, saying that, okay, this Tibet trade relations, Tibet BRI, Tibet Global South, there's this tendency to do that. And I think there's merit to analyzing that. But I think more than that, can we really think about truth and restorative justice as a way to reconfigure global geopolitical order? Can that moral force be a way through which we can challenge that thinking and to really challenge that discourse and reclaim the human rights discourse? And I think this is something that I want to leave this hall to ponder. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dessel, for your presentation on restorative justice and for sharing us on the dual standards of China's Tibet policy and how CCP is redefining international discourses on human rights violations and China using developmental tools as tools for domination to justify their domination on Tibetan and other regions under occupation. Thank you very much for your presentation. And lastly, we have Ms. Zumrite Arkin. Ms. Arkin is the Vice President of World Uyghur Congress. She leads World Uyghur Congress international advocacy efforts, engaging with multilateral institutions, governments, and various stakeholders. She regularly engages at the UN Human Rights Council, where she raises China's violation of international covenants and treaties. In 2021, leading up to the Beijing Winter Olympics, she was one of the key activists leading No Beijing 22 campaign, leading to the boycott of games by 11 governments. She is also the spokesperson at the World Uyghur Congress. She fluently speaks Uyghur, French, English, and offers commentary to international media outlets. She has Bachelor of International Relations from the University of Montreal and a Bachelor of Law from University of Laval. She was awarded the Freedom of Worship Award by the Roosevelt Foundation in April 2024. Ms. Arkin, please go.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chair, for the kind introduction. I want to first thank the Central Tibetan Administration for organizing this forum, and with the Sikyong, we were just in Washington a couple days ago. It's a pleasure to see you and to see many familiar faces and also new ones. And thank you to my co-panelists as well for bringing up important issues that I think it's really great to see so many allies in this room, and it's great to see that all of us are committed in justice and really bringing accountability for victims that are persecuted under the Chinese government. I think in the last few years, the Chinese government has effectively curated this image or impression to the global community that things have gone back to normal in China. whether it's in East Turkestan, in Tibet, mainland China, or Hong Kong. A couple years ago, those issues were highlighted in mainstream media. Nowadays, it's very rare that we talk about these issues unless there is an official visit to China. So the human rights violations or the repressions are less visible these days, but in my opinion, it has been more institutionalized all over China. I think none of this is normal, and I think this is something that we must question, especially now that a lot of, in the current global context and geopolitical context, there is a rapprochement with China. A lot of prime ministers, presidents are officially visiting the Chinese president and negotiating trade agreements. So this is the time to really bring up these issues again. And I want to tell you that my last communication with my relatives back home was in 2017. None of this is normal. And none of my fellow Uyghurs have been able to communicate with family members since 2017. Just to indicate the level of repression. We live in an age where technology and communication has never been easier and more accessible, yet all of us struggle to communicate with our relatives. And I'm just talking about not even us political activists, but also the normal, usual Uyghur community members in the diaspora who are not even involved in advocacy. So I think this is a great reminder that this is our collective duty and responsibility to push for accountability measures in our own jurisdictions and constituencies. So as we all know, since 2017, the Chinese government has operated a vast network of internment camps and prisons in East Turkestan, in the northwest of China. And estimates are between 2 to 3 million, and yet we have not, although the government has recently been saying that they've dismantled some of these camps, we haven't seen any evidence of that. And what we have seen, though, is the increase in prison sentences, in prison rates, especially in the last few years. And right now, there's a lot of also formal prisons where people are sentenced to long-term prison sentences. And if you really look at the charges, so actually the Uyghur Human Rights Project has documented these and reported on this. If you look at the sentences, they're all related to terrorism charges. So, you know, Uyghurs are labeled terrorists under the counterterrorism law that was introduced in 2015 along with other regulations. So normal religious activity and behavior is considered under the law as terrorist activities. So praying 5 times a day, fasting during Ramadan, naming your child with an Islamic name, all of these, and traveling to Muslim majority countries, whether it's Turkey or Malaysia, Indonesia, or Saudi Arabia, all of these constitute criminal behaviors, and they're people who are listed for practicing these practices. They are immediately red flags to the Chinese government, and they're subjected to arbitrary arrest and detention. Personally, I have over 30 of my relatives that have disappeared in the vast system of camps since 2017. A lot of my cousins studied in Al-Azhar in Egypt, in Cairo, and upon their return, they were detained just because they studied Islam, but also because they traveled to Muslim-majority countries. And I have yet to hear from them, and I know some of my uncles have received lengthy sentences due to their religious practice. So there is a correlation between Islam and terrorism as well. So in recent years, following the closure of some camps, China's forced labor system in East Turkestan and beyond has expanded. And so some researchers have reported that from 2022 to 2023, the state intensified its labor transfer programs, making 2023 likely the highest year on record for involuntary work placements among Uyghurs and Turkic peoples. And it's important to understand the coerced labor is not just forced labor, but it's part of the whole system of oppression. So it's not just coerced labor, but it's also separation of families, because these laborers, Uyghurs, have been, of course, coerced into this labor, but also separated from their families because they're sent to mainland China, where they work in different industries, whether it's in the fishing industry, agriculture, textile, solar, and many others, and also in automobile industry for the batteries. So we have to look into the forced labor system as a system of mass internment as well, and the state is normalizing and institutionalizing the labor transfer program as a core economic mechanism. So these transfers are also accompanied by propaganda. So there are usually ceremonial send-offs of these laborers, red labor transfer sashes, speeches, and once the workers are sent to the factories or their dormitories, they are usually surveilled, monitored constantly. They have limited freedom of movement, and they don't get to see their family members when they want. And the coercion is, of course, embedded, because refusal may result in detention, reprisals, or pressure against family members. So when we engage with some private sector stakeholders, one of the questions that we receive most often is, but these are economic programs that are good for Uyghurs because Uyghurs get jobs, right? But the thing is, these Uyghurs were never meant to be working in these factories. They were forced into this. These Uyghurs, some of them were professors, some of them were doctors, some of them were presidents of universities, some of them were writers. They had jobs. They didn't need to be sent off to these labor transfer programs. So this is something that we have to keep in mind, because this is the nature of control by the state. In terms of surveillance, I think my colleague has already laid out kind of the surveillance system there, but one thing that I want to really highlight is that this surveillance system was introduced by Party Secretary Chen Chong-guo in 2016, who was previously appointed to Tibet. So it shows you how there is a coordinated effort to replicate these systems all over China and its occupied territories. And our lands, our territories, our homelands have been the testing ground. So we are now seeing the export of these technologies in Europe and in the West. So we're here to also warn the rest of the world about these AI-powered facial recognition cameras and so on. But beyond the sophisticated technology, surveillance, there's also officials that are sent to Uyghur homes who are constantly monitoring people inside their homes. So this is a practice that was documented a couple of years ago by different organizations, including Human Rights Watch. But there's also these kind of community watches programs where Uyghurs and like neighbors can report, and actually they're encouraged by administrative officials to report suspicious behaviors from neighbors. So this is something that has also created an environment of fear and isolated Uyghurs even more. In terms of Forbes, so religious freedom, there's very little freedom these days to practice religion, even inside your home, as there is constant surveillance. A couple of years ago, when the repression started, the Chinese authorities called Uyghurs to basically hand in all of the religious textbooks. And people were actually later detained for owning religious textbooks, or they were sentenced for learning the Quran 10 years ago, or teaching Islamic teachings decades ago. So we have, for example, women figures, buis that we call, who have been sanctioned and detained and received like 10 or 20 year sentences because they taught the Quran and Islamic values to children in their communities. And there's also, at the moment, so the Uyghur Human Rights Project has documented the enforced disappearance, detention, and imprisonment of at least 1,046 Turkic religious figures since 2014. So these are imams and other religious figures within the community. And this also, I think Chunglun has mentioned, the syncretization process is also embedded in China's policies of control in the region. So we've seen how the mosques have been replaced. For example, the minarets have been replaced by Chinese flags, or even the Quran verses have been replaced by, CCP allegiance phrases, and a lot of the mosques have also been destroyed over the last few years. So the Australian Strategic Policy Institute has documented using satellite imagery that approximately 16,000 mosques, so 65% of the total in East Turkestan, has been destroyed or damaged as a result of government policies, mostly since 2017. And estimated 8,500 have been demolished completely, and the others partly or transform into other sites such as parking lots, bars, restaurants, and others. Our shrines, so other sites of cultural and religious significance, shrines, cemeteries, and other places have also been destroyed by the Chinese government. In terms of family separation, I think I've already kind of laid the ground for this, but I think here the aim of the Chinese government is really to uproot Uyghurs and Tibetans and others from their way of living and also from their cultural and religious practices. And family separation contributes to that. So by separating families, children that are being sent to boarding schools, so Uyghur children are also being sent to boarding schools. This is a way to kind of block the generational passing of knowledge and passing of cultural norms and others. I don't think I'm going to go so much into the violence that were used against Uyghur women inside and outside of the camps. Of course, there's reports of forced sterilization policies that have contributed to drastic decline in birth rates in our region in the last few years, but also forced ethnic marriages between Uyghur women and Han Chinese men that are subsidized by the state. So these are also coerced marriages, because if you say no, there's, of course, consequences, reprisals against family members, and there is some sort of coercion embedded. And then I think in terms of transnational oppression, it's something that, of course, a lot of governments are now finally talking about. It was about time, but we have mostly Western governments taking this issue seriously, and it has to be taken seriously because a lot of us are struggling with this, and a lot of us, our communities, are living on the edge in exile. Even in democratic countries, even here in Geneva, we're followed all the time by Chinese agents or proxies, or we're faced with all sorts of campaigns that are aiming to delegitimize our work and also our character. So I've experienced, for example, character assassination campaigns, slander campaigns, deep fakes, digital attacks, and so many others, and my organization as well, and it's widely documented. But this is something that the government of China and many other authoritarian governments are using as successful tactics to silence activists. Of course, I refuse to be silent today, but a lot of my fellow activists in my community are not willing to pay the same price, because why do we have to? This is why I think it's important that we highlight these issues whenever possible, and that parliament members, I see some parliament members here today, and senators and policymakers, it is important to make it public. It has to be on public record. We have to push governments to address these issues, especially ahead of official visits that are coming up. So we need to push these issues, because protecting these communities is part of our duty and responsibility. We all share this. And so these tactics have to be criticized. These practices have to be stopped, so that we can live in a free, more democratic society that is also respecting human rights. Because after all, this is why people like us have fled to the West, to seek security and safety. So one thing that I wanted to also end is that I think there are a lot of high-level cases, but my own government, the Canadian government, just went last month, in December, to China, and yet we have not seen any public mention of Uyghur Canadian citizen Hussein Jalil, who's been missing since almost 20 years, whose family is living in Ontario, Canada, and he went missing because he decided to visit Uzbekistan with his family, and the Uzbek police gave him basically to the Chinese police, and he was deported to China. And since then, he's been missing. The Canadian government managed to get the two Michaels out, and it's their duty to get Hussein Jalil out as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Arkin, for sharing with us the situation inside East Turkestan. How a normal action that we deem normal in free world are being criminalized, not only within the East Turkestan, but people outside of the Uyghur people outside of East Turkestan are being targeted, prosecuted. This is what we call as transnational repression. So thank you for your presentation on the situation inside East Turkestan and a kind of update on the situation of people, the Uyghur people. Thank you very much. We have completely run out of time, so thank you all. We know that the human rights violations is, I believe, a symptom of a much larger thing. The fact is that the people like Tibet, Uyghur, the Southern Mongolians, because of the occupation of Tibetan people, Tibet and Uyghur and the Southern Mongolian, we are facing the human rights violations. The human rights violation is not just the main issue, it is the symptom of a much larger underlying thing. So we need to up our ante to discuss about these things in future. Nevertheless, I would say that the forums or events like these are important, because out there are many billions of people, because of the Chinese economic might, because of their political might, because of their state propaganda, there are many millions of billions of people who do not really know the situation inside China, inside Tibet, inside East Turkestan, inside Southern Mongolia. So I think we need to continue to advocate, continue to organize these kind of seminars and raise our voices. Thank you very much all our co-panelists for your presentations, and I would like to thank the audience for your attention and participation. Thank you very much. So,
thank you so much, all the speakers and moderators. Before we go for the lunch, I now request Kong Sekyung Pempat Siringla to present a small memento to our speakers and moderators as a gesture of thanks and appreciations. 이 앞에 있습니다.